What's going on, guys? I'm Mike, and you're watching the Texas Fishing Force. Alright, today I want to discuss the number one thing asked online about fishing in Galveston and the Texas coast, and that is questions about the weather. You know, we see it all the time on Facebook fishing pages and fishing forums and things like that when it comes to Galveston. People are, we see questions like, what's the water look like down there right now? Or is the wind going to be okay to fish this weekend? Or what wind directions do I need to look for? What are good conditions? What are bad conditions? Can I take my 13-foot John boat, 65 miles offshore, and 4-foot swells? Well, I'm going to go ahead and answer that one for you. Absolutely not. No. I know there's a lot of varying opinions about this, but I figured I would discuss it, explain what I know about the weather, and maybe it'll help you in the future catch more fish. Alright, so what we're going to discuss is what conditions you need to be looking for when it comes to fishing and the safety out there, what those conditions mean. I'm going to go over the apps that I use to help determine accurately which conditions and how that's going to affect me fishing, and then we're going to discuss how to use the weather to catch more fish. Okay, if you're fishing in Galveston, you're really going to fall into one of two categories, depending on where you're fishing and things like that. And we're going to break it up. And the conditions that you need to be looking for when it comes to the forecast and the weather are determined by what category you fall into. So you're either going to be fishing from land, meaning that you're fishing from the piers, Galveston Fishing Pier, or 61st, Seawolf Park, something like that. You're fishing in the surf, or just from land in general. The second category is you're fishing from the boat. And if you're fishing from a boat, you're either running through the bays, you're going out to the jetties, or you're going offshore, basically. I know that's very, very broad, but the reason that we separate those categories is because the conditions that you need to be worried about and the conditions that you need to look at are going to be different based on if you are land fishing or if you are fishing from a boat. So let's get into those conditions. All right, there are a lot of conditions when it comes to the weather and the forecast that will affect your fishing and your safety while you're out there. I'm going to go over the 4 conditions that, in my opinion, you need to look at every time you're planning a fishing trip. There are 4 conditions that, no matter what, will give you a more accurate idea of how your fishing is going to go. Alright, number 1 is the rain. And I'm going to go over rain first and pretty quickly because rain really has the least effect on how the fish react. However, it is the easiest condition to determine beforehand. We see it on every app, on every weather channel when it shows a percentage of rain. Rain isn't going to hurt you. In fact, rain helps fishing a lot of the time, and we need rain. Rain clears up the water in the bays. And so long periods of drought, you're going to see muddier water, and so we need some extended periods of rain to clean up that water, and it helps us fishing. In fact, some of the best fish that I've ever caught was right in the middle of a rainstorm. Rain is a good thing. We want rain. Now, if you're on a boat and things like that, you've got a little bit to worry about just because your visibility out there is going to be limited. And you don't want to get stuck out there. I mean, the number one thing that rain is going to do is going to hinder your experience. If you're out there soaking wet and cold, and especially in the fall, winter months, it can get pretty rough. But it's not going to hurt your fishing. In fact, it's going to help it. We want rain. We just don't want it all the time. So, all right, number 2 is the wind. And this is probably one of the most important conditions that we look at because it affects your fishing a lot more than most of your other weather and forecast conditions. When we're looking at the wind, we're looking at two things. We're looking at wind direction and we're looking at wind speed. Now, both of those are going to affect your fishing in different ways, and it's going to affect your safety in different ways. So, what do we want? Now, there's an old saying, and I've heard it many, many times before, and this might be true for every other place other than Galveston, and that is, wind from the west, fishing is the best, or fish bite the best. Wind from the east, fish bite the least. So, I want you to take that, and I want you to completely forget it, because that is not true in Galveston. In fact, it is almost completely opposite from the truth. That is not what we want in Galveston. When we're talking about wind direction, if you look at a map of Galveston and the way that it is shaped, it's pretty easy to tell which winds we want. Now, when you're looking at apps and the forecast, and it tells you certain winds, and I thought that this was common knowledge, but I've actually talked to a few people that didn't understand this. When it says, when an app or the forecast news channel says southwest winds, that does not mean that the wind is blowing southwest. It means that it is blowing from the southwest. And the reason that they do that is because it is a lot more accurate to determine where wind is coming from rather than where it is going. Because wind is not linear, it's going to move around things, and generally it's going to have a curve one way or the other. First, I'm going to go over the two most common wind directions that we're going to see in Galveston and in the bays and things like that. And that is southwest winds and southeast winds. So what do we want? We want southeast. We do not want southwest. Southwest isn't horrible, but it's not good either. What happens when we have southwest winds, or west winds in general, is that wind comes up and it pushes all that muddy water out of the bays and it spreads it out and it makes the clarity awful. And we know when it comes to fishing, the more clarity you have, the better the fishing is. The fish can see more. It's a lot easier. So what we want is southeast, and the reason is because if you look at a map, southeast winds push all that clear water from offshore in through the channel, into the bays, and that's exactly what we want. We want that clarity. We want that water movement that to move in that direction, and it helps. It helps with the clarity. It helps with the fishing, and it actually brings in bigger fish closer to shore, which is what we want. All right, so do those west winds, those southwest winds, northwest winds, do those mean that you can't fish? Absolutely not. It just means that you've got to change the way that you're fishing, change the location that you're fishing. You've just got to make some changes, or you're going to be fighting for them. It's going to be a little bit harder that day than if you've got those nice southeast winds. So, change what you're doing. Figure out where those spots are that you need to go, where that clarity is a little bit better. What about the rest of the directions? Now, you're not going to see a lot of north winds and things like that unless you have, during hurricane season, we do see that just because of the differences in pressure, and you're going to see some of that northwest wind, northeast wind come down every once in a while for a couple days, muddy up the water. It's not what we want. Now, going on with wind, there is another aspect of wind that we've got to look at, and that is wind speed. Wind speed is going to affect fishing dramatically. When you have high wind, it is, we all know that it's hard to cast into high winds. It's also, if you're on a boat, it is unsafe because it makes the swells higher. So what do we want? Me personally, I like in that 8 to 12 mile an hour winds. Once it gets over that, I start to worry about taking my boat out. If it gets higher than that, I'm generally fishing from shore, and I'm really trying to figure out direction of wind so that I know where I'm casting into, where fish are going to be moving. Anytime we have a lot of wind, it actually keeps the water moving, which is a good thing because we want fish moving. We don't want stagnant fish. We want that water movement. But we want a reasonable amount of wind. If you start getting in that 17 mile an hour winds, it starts getting rough out there, regardless if you're on a boat or onshore. That wind can be brutal. For me, the best wind that we can have is that southeast when, somewhere in that 8 to 12 mile an hour, that's perfect. That's what I'm looking for. If I can find a weekend that's like that, we got clear skies without rain, I'm out there. I'm going to be out there nonstop. That's what I'm looking for. All right, number 3 is tides and current. Now, this is very important because fish will always move with the tides and the current. Always. Any bait shop that you go to, in fact, you can get this online, there's a lot of apps that have it as well, are going to show you the tide times. And sometimes you'll see, an early morning tide and then an evening tide, and so you'll have this kind of arc. But sometimes the tide will move up and down throughout the day. Now there's going to be a drastic change at one point or the other. But we want to fish with the tides. How do we use that information to help us fish? Well, it's pretty easy actually. All you need to do is figure out where those fish are moving from and to, and put yourself in between them. That is the easiest way to explain it. Now I know that there are places in the bays and things like that, and I'm not going to sit there and tell you, when the tide is moving in or out, you need to be fishing the north shoreline or the south shoreline or this, because I guarantee somebody's going to tell me that they tried that and they didn't catch any fish and it's my fault. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say watch the tides. The best fishing that you're going to have is during that tidal movement. Like I said before, we want movement in the water. When we have movement, the fish are moving, they're more active, and when you have active fish, they're biting. That's exactly what we want. All right, when we're thinking about tides, an old fisherman a long time ago told me this, and I'm going to pass it along. You want to think of that body of water like a really big bathtub. Now, when you look at a bathtub and you go in and you turn the water on and you put the plug in and the water starts filling up the bathtub, if you throw in some toys, right, what's going to happen? Over time, those toys are going to slowly move away from the faucet, and they're going to be at the very end of the bathtub. Now, if you turn the water off and you let that water kind of sit there for a minute, what happens? Those toys, they start to move around and they'll spread out a little bit. Now, we want to look at those toys like they're fish because they operate in the same way. Now, we let them sit there for a little while, and then we go and we pull out the plug. What happens? All of those toys slowly start moving towards the drain, and that's where they sit. So, if you think about that in a fishing way, with the way that the tides move up and down, you know where the fish are going, you know where they're coming from, because they move with the tides. So if you can place yourself, for instance, where that drain or where if you're out at the jetties, that's why everybody fishes the boat cut, is because those fish are coming in and out of that spot. Same thing with the bays. There's certain spots in the bays where fish are going to be coming in and out during those tides, and that's also why everybody fishes during those tidal movements, especially when you have a fast rising or a fast falling tide. That's some of the best fishing you can get. That's what you want. Now, it's not going to last a long time, but you've got that window that is going to help you catch fish. All right. The last condition, the fourth condition that we're going to talk about, is the swells. And really, this is a condition that it only applies to people that are on the boat. Now, a lot of people will look at the swells and they'll say, oh, wow, we have 3-foot swells, there's no way I'm going out. Or people will look at the swells and say, oh, it's only 1 foot today, I'm definitely going offshore. But that's only half of the equation. What you're really looking for when it comes to swells is the height along with the distance between them. I'll tell you right now, a 2-foot swell, is at 10 seconds is way better than a 1-foot swell at a third of a second or a half second. That is going to be really, really choppy, but when you have those long distance between them, or even 3-foot swells at 5 or 10 seconds is much better than, I'm looking at the distance much more than I am the height. Now, when we get into that 3 and 4 foot range, I'm not dealing with it because it's going to be rocky regardless. But You've got to look at the entire equation, not just the height. Those swells, they can really beat you up out there, and honestly can get really dangerous if you're not paying attention. That's why that's one of those conditions that I check every single time I'm taking my boat out. All right, so how do we accurately find all of these conditions and figure out what we need to know before we go when we're planning our fishing trip? Well, it's all about the apps that we use. So right now I'm going to go over those apps, the apps that I used, accurately determine the conditions and then plan my fishing trip. All right, so these are the apps that I use for fishing. I've got quite a few, but I use them all for different purposes. When you're first going out, the easy ones are to go either to your weather, or I just have the Weather Channel app, and it brings it up. Here, let me go down to Galveston, and it'll give you a good idea. Now, you've got to know that this isn't going to be completely accurate. It gives you a good idea a little bit ahead of time, but this is like the first app that I check, and it's something that gives me a good idea of what it's going to be like in the future. But you also have to realize that this isn't going to be that accurate until about 2 to 3 days before your trip. But it'll give you a good idea. If you're seeing 100% chance of rain and 90%, chances are it's going to be pretty rough out there. Or if you see 20 mile an hour winds, it's probably going to be rough, and it's going to be somewhat accurate even a week beforehand. All right, so when I go to this, I'm generally looking, here, we'll go daily. So these are the next couple days. So I'm looking down here, it's going to show the rain percentage. We got 10, 20, and then, looking at Tuesday, it goes up into the 50, 90%. This isn't horrible, but it gives me a good idea what days are going to be clear, which ones aren't. And we can go to hourly, and it'll give you a little bit better idea here, as well as wind and things like that. The next app, like I said before, one of the first things that I check, especially when I'm taking my boat out, is the swells. So if I go, this is swell info. I'm not sure if this one costs any money. Maybe I can put a link down below. But this shows all the days, it does a week, and it'll show you the morning and PM, AM, PM of the swells, and how those. Now, if you click on any one of those days, let's click on, and it'll tell you a little bit more accurately. It'll give you a little condition description. Here it says fairly clean with west-northwest winds 5 to 10 miles in the morning, shifting west for the afternoon. Now, those winds aren't great by any means, but when we look at the tides down here, and it does it in 3-hour blocks, so 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., 6 p.m. These swells are fantastic. We've got 0.6 foot at 7 seconds, 1.1 foot at 4 seconds. That's fantastic. Those are the kind of boating conditions that we want. It'll also tell you the surf if you're out there fishing in the surf. Ankle high or less surf is what it says. So that these are good conditions, minus the wind. So, and we can go to any day that we want. And this has always been pretty accurate for me. So I don't really have I don't have any issues. I check this app pretty regularly. Now, here is an app that I think everybody should have, and it is called Fish Weather. I'll put a link to that as well. Now, when you go to Fish Weather, it has a lot of these buoy markers. So if I'm going offshore, maybe I can click one of these, and it'll go to forecast. So this is the Galveston buoy here. And up at the top, it shows you wind. It'll show you high gusts. So, like today we've got 8 to 12 mile an hour winds with, up to 16 mile an hour gusts. It'll show you sky conditions, if it's going to be cloudy, gives you the temperature. So down here it shows wave height in the blue here. It's showing 1.8, 1.7 feet at 5 seconds. That's not horrible, not bad at all. Now down below here, it's showing, here's this gray block, and it's showing the precipitation. And as you can see, we have none. See, there's a little bit there, and it's going to start raining like crazy. Now these are by day. If you look up here at the top, it shows Monday. Here there's Tuesday, and this is a great app to have. I use this all the time. #1 app that I use when I'm trying to forecast fishing. All right. Beyond that, we've got the predict wind, and this is really cool too, because it shows Galveston, and it shows you direction. See, like I said before, we were concerned with where wind is coming from, and this kind of gives you a much more accurate of where it's coming from and where it's going. So this is nice to know. Between all of these are the apps that I use. Here's one as well. This is a tide chart. And so it'll show you, you've got down at the bottom, it'll show you your low tides and high tides. And like I said before, you have multiple. But generally you have one that rises really quick, one that drops really quick, and these are those times that you want to be fishing in those areas. So those are very helpful. All right, that is about it when I'm looking at the conditions, and I hope this video helped you, gave you a little bit of information, explained some of it at least. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment, send me a message, and always like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.